Hi, my name is Suzanne Remington, and I'm here today to talk with Paul DePalo. He's running for the position of Governor's Council in November, which is a statewide position, and I want to hear more about him and his philosophy and what the job's about. So let's start out with talking about you. Tell us about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Shrewsbury, and I'm Shrewsbury through and through. My parents met working at Spags. Spags was my summer job growing up. And I went to Wesleyan University for my undergraduate, got my law degree from Northeastern Law. Later I got my Master's of Education at Fitchburg State. I have experience doing corporate litigation in Boston, which I left actually to teach at Shrewsbury High School, and I was there for a number of years. Teaching English, and I left there to go to Uxbridge High School, where I developed and taught in an alternative program for kids with social emotional disabilities, at-risk kids at the high school level. And after that, I went on to open my own law practice in Worcester, where I do education law and I work with children. So the career trajectory has been unusual, but it's been focused on helping people and especially helping children.
Right, and it has a lot to do with education and the law. So to bring both of those things together, that's a lot that you've done already.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't know even what Governor's Council is, and I know it's a very important, influential position, so I think it's important to go over what you're running for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been on the campaign trail since November, and my district covers 65 cities and towns in Central Mass, so I'm quite busy. And I spend a lot of time explaining to voters what the council is. Most folks don't know what it is. They don't know who represents them. You know, and I always say it's time for a counselor who's out in the communities and talking with folks, because it does have an important role. So the most important job of Governor's Council is to approve or reject the governor's judicial nominees. So we see that happening in Washington right now. In Massachusetts, we have this specialized body that handles that work for our state court judges. And it has other roles as well. It approves or rejects nominees for the Industrial Accident Board, which is intimately involved with the workers' compensation system, and also the Parole Board, which of course handles parole matters in the criminal side of things. So it's a very important role. The judicial nominees are the ones that I think impact all of our lives the most importantly. And so that's why I'm running, because judges matter, and they matter on issues that affect all of us, from women's rights to workers' rights to LGBT rights, and to criminal justice, probably most prominently as far as the news goes and as far as folks paying attention to what's going on in our courts.
So I find it even more important, because I don't know if a lot of people realize that judges are appointed to the age of 70, so they can have a very lengthy career and be there for a long time and make a lot of decisions that impact us very, very greatly. So why are you running?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, you know, judges matter, and my passion, as you might guess from my background, is the juvenile courts. What I've seen over and over again is that the kids who are caught up in our courts are overwhelmingly from disadvantaged backgrounds. Disproportionately, they're kids who live in our foster system. Disproportionately, it's kids who've experienced really significant trauma in their childhood. And I think we can do a lot better. You know, a story I like to tell is that things that I did in high school, typical teenage things that I got grounded for, I've had students and clients who did you know, far less egregious things and wind up in state custody. I had a student at one time who was living in foster care. He'd been there since he was 2. His parents had abandoned him. He was about 15 or 16 years old. He got caught stealing candy from a convenience store. He shouldn't have done it. But what happened was he was referred to the courts as a child requiring assistance. There were conditions placed on him. There was a 6-week, basically he was to come back in 6 weeks for an assessment of how he'd been doing. And one of the conditions was a 10 p.m. curfew. So, you know teenagers, I know teenagers, we both were one once. Teenagers making bad decisions are just going to keep making bad decisions until there's intervention, until there's something that steps in the way and provides either counseling or support, something to get them on the right path. So when we just place conditions on them and hope for the best, it doesn't work. So this child went back to court. He had violated the 10 p.m. curfew multiple times over 6 weeks, and he was taken into state custody, and he was brought to a facility over an hour away from his high school. Now, in the interest of continuing his education, they were busing him, you know, as I said, over an hour every morning to get to his school, and he wasn't arriving ready to learn. He was a time bomb. I mean, you know, he was getting harassed and bullied at the facility he was at because, you know, quite frankly, they're under-resourced. There's not enough social workers in those buildings. And when he misbehaved in school, whether it was walking out of class or skipping a class, what would be a detention for the average child ends up part of his court record, and the consequences just keep ramping up.
Absolutely.
And we've never stepped in. There's never been a chance where someone stepped in to actually catch this kid before he gets caught in those cycles. So I think we can do better. I think judges are a big part of helping to divert kids and give them more opportunity.
Right, so I believe kind of what you're referring to is something that people often call the breaking the cycle of the school to prison pipeline, or sometimes, as you were talking about trauma, the trauma to prison pipeline, to put it into sort of a catchphrase. Would that be correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, school to prison pipeline is a concept that I've been watching as a teacher and an attorney for a long time. And, from my experience and really conversations I've had on the campaign trail, I have started saying trauma to prison pipeline, because that's really what it is. Sometimes these things manifest in school, but they're manifesting because of the trauma the child's had. My first internship in law school was at the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office working in the Child Abuse Division.
Okay.
So I saw horrible things there, horrible things. But what I also saw was that because in a lot of the cases, the children had grown since the abuse had happened. I saw a lot of children who had been the victims of horrible abuse, but who now, as teenagers and adolescents, were caught up in the court system.
Yes.
So we're prosecuting their abusers as they're getting prosecuted themselves in the juvenile court. So yeah, it's trauma. We know it impacts brain development, right? So we already know, as we mentioned, like teenagers aren't even equipped to make good decisions a lot of the times, right? And kids who've had trauma, that development is even further kind of stymied. So we really need to reach out and do a better job of catching these kids.
I agree. I have a connection to the juvenile court, so I see the same thing.
Well, I know you were a strong advocate for bringing a new juvenile court judge to the Worcester courthouse, right? And that's a systemic problem that we have. Our courts really don't have enough judges to handle the caseloads that are coming through, let alone enough, as I mentioned, social workers and et cetera. So, I was very happy to see that you were successful in helping to get a new juvenile court position in the Worcester courthouse. And I'm excited that if elected, I'll have the chance to be interviewing and be a part of the hearings where that judge is selected.
I'm excited about that too, actually. So I'm going to skip ahead then, since you mentioned that, and ask you, what would be some qualities? You did talk about this a bit already, but additionally maybe that you would look for a juvenile court justice in Worcester County.
Yeah, well, the first thing I was just mentioning is, without a doubt, we need judges in our juvenile courts especially, but really in our district and superior too, who do understand human and brain development, who do understand the impact of trauma, who do understand, at the very least, some of the rudimentary concepts in psychology and the way these events impact people. Because to really dispense justice, in my view, is to solve the problem. We don't solve any problems when we're hard on someone, but don't do anything to make sure they don't end up back in jail. We have really high recidivism rates in Massachusetts, and we can do a lot better with that. And I think that judges who have the right perspective are going to be able to make the better decision in a lot of cases. Right now, we're in the midst of criminal justice reform in Massachusetts. The legislature passed a very comprehensive bill in the past year, signed by Governor Baker. It was overwhelmingly bipartisan in the legislature. And what it does is give judges a lot more discretion in certain cases, especially in nonviolent drug offenses.
Okay.
So yeah, as far as that goes, even before these options were on the table for judges, there are diversion programs, evidence-based.
Yes.
They're not, we hope it works. These are proven programs that are not only cheaper in the short run because they cost less than incarceration, they're cheaper in the long run because they reduce recidivism, so we get people on the right path and out of the cycle of incarceration. And in the last 5 years in Worcester County, only 1 in 10 times has a judge utilized that option. And every case is different, so it shouldn't be 10 out of 10.
Right.
But 1 out of 10 to me seems way too low. So I think we need judges who are embracing this emerging philosophy of getting smart on crime.
And it also sounds, I don't want to put words in your mouth, like you want judges to look at the big picture and not just at these actions, like having the community, the schools, the families, the courts come together in support of those kids to kind of give them more opportunity.
Yeah,
But because
absolutely.
yeah.
And you know, as you heard my background as a former teacher and currently an attorney, when I'm dealing with child clients or I'm dealing with education law issues, because I've been a teacher, I have a broader perspective. I think I'm able to deliver a little better for my clients than otherwise. And I think it's the same for judges. We need judges who have a diverse background, whether it be professionally or academically, folks who've really looked at, who approach issues from a comprehensive, nonpartisan, pragmatic viewpoint, so that they're looking to, as I said, solve problems and not just appear to be tough or vengeful.
So this is a little bit of a tough question because there are a lot of other factors to consider when looking at a judge and what you want in a judge. But how do you feel about whether or not it's a plus for that person to have experience in this area, as opposed to somebody who's never sort of stepped foot in Worcester County?
Oh, I mean, regional equity is extremely important because, as you were just saying, we need judges who understand the communities they're serving as well. I was just talking with the mayor of Fitchburg recently about programs up there that deal with reentry issues. So when we have folks getting out of prison, a lot of times, first of all, they haven't had adequate counseling in the prison. And second of all, they're transitioning back into our communities, but their work has been interrupted, their family life has been interrupted, their education's been interrupted, their living situation's been interrupted. So, that's one of the reasons, again, why people just fall back into the cycles of behavior that got them in there in the first place. So in Fitchburg, it's a great program, and we would need judges up in North County who know it's there and are engaged with those programs, right? Likewise in Worcester, likewise in Uxbridge, up and down all the district courts in our region. So it's extremely important, and we need to constantly be reminding the state that the state doesn't end at 128. That we're out here, we have needs, and so part of that is representation in the judiciary. Our highest court, the Supreme Judicial Court, hasn't had a justice from Central Massachusetts in a very long time.
Oh, is that right?
And our appellate courts in the state have only a small handful of folks from Central Massachusetts. So we're really underrepresented here. And I think that is an important piece to understand the community you're serving on the bench. And as far as representation goes, right now we have only 40% of our judges are women. That's too low for 2018. It's too low for Massachusetts. It's too low for a functioning society. We need to do better on that. I'm going to be an advocate to get appointees who are female so that we can rectify that issue. Same with minorities. People of color are underrepresented on the bench compared to the general population. And the reality is, on all three issues, there's plenty of smart and qualified lawyers in the Worcester area. There's plenty of smart and qualified female lawyers. There's plenty of smart and qualified minority lawyers. So it's not as if there's not qualified candidates to choose from, so we can do a lot better job. And I think one role of being a governor's counselor is to be vocal and to be advocating for those things.
So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. What is your feeling on, especially because why don't people know about governor's council, and what do you think, what would be maybe a plan or a goal of yours to make it more general knowledge amongst voters and citizens of the Commonwealth?
Yeah, I mean, the first step is the campaign I'm running. We've been running since November. I have 65 towns. I've spoken to audiences in all 65 of them. My car is almost falling apart from all this mileage. But just getting out there and talking about issues, talking about juvenile justice, talking about criminal justice reform. When I get in front of folks, they haven't heard of Governor's Council, and by the time I'm done, they're really interested in it. And because everyone knows that judges matter, but the process that the council undergoes is arcane, and it's arcane for a couple of reasons. The first is, we need civic education in our schools. It's been stripped away in the high-stakes testing environment. This is a tangential issue, but one I've experienced. And so we need to bring civics education back. There's no reason why we shouldn't be learning about our state government if we want an educated citizenry, right? Secondly, we need more transparency in state government. The Governor's Council meets once a week in Boston. There's particular chambers in the State House. The only reason that you can get access to what's happened at the meetings publicly is that there's a private citizen who records every single meeting and posts it online.
Just by chance, like just this person.
This gentleman is just very invested in the process.
He is.
And he attends every meeting, and yeah, he does audio recordings and posts them. And that's a great service. But otherwise, if you want to find out how the counselors voted, you need to go to the State House and access those records. They're not available online. The State House News Service doesn't really cover council meetings too aggressively.
Right.
So I think we can do a lot better than that. I mean, this should be a very open and transparent process. I mean, my goodness, in Washington we get bumper to bumper coverage when there's a Supreme Court nominee hearing.
Right.
In Massachusetts, you would barely know when there's a Supreme Judicial Court nominee coming before the council because there's just not that coverage or transparency. So I think that's something that we can work on, and I would advocate for as a counselor as well.
That's a very good point, because even though I'm a person who tends to pay attention to the news for the most part, and I'm involved in some of my work with the juvenile court, I don't hear about judges being added to the circuit at all. Yeah, in the news.
I mean, for example, our highest court, right, which is a very impactful court. I mean, one case where Massachusetts was a leader for the rest of the country was on allowing folks to marry whomever they love.
Right.
And that wouldn't have happened if we didn't have Supreme Judicial Court justices who were who understood where our culture was at and where society was at, and what the words in our Constitution meant in the present day. And right now, there's 7 justices. 5 of them have been appointed by Governor Baker. That's a lot. And in the next 2 years, there's going to be another seat opening up on that court because it's mandatory retirement at 70. We know it's coming up.
Yeah.
So, Governor Baker's very popular. If he wins re-election, that means 6 of the 7 judges on our highest court are coming from one administration's nominations.
Right.
And that's fine. Every governor is there to nominate judges, but that's a sharp imbalance that we're going to be living with probably for a generation. And so, the more public attention to this process we can get, the better, I think.
Now, how many, just getting back to a little bit about the meat of the council, you may have said this, how many members are there? 8, did you say?
This is so important, yeah. Okay. So there's 8 members. They're each elected from a particular district. So as I said, my district is 65 towns here in Central Mass. The technical definition is by state senate districts. I cover 5 state senate districts. It's a lot. So it's an 8-member body. They meet in Boston once a week. It's a position where you have that weekly meeting. As a counselor, the way I'd approach a job is to spend at least another day and a half, maybe 2 days a week, meeting with nominees outside of the process to get a better handle on who they are, get a better handle on how I want to manage my questions at the hearing. So we're talking 2 days a week job. The only other thing I guess I'd mention logistically is that when there's a tie, a 4-4 vote, it's the lieutenant governor who has the tie-breaking vote.
I was actually thinking about that. How does that? So does the lieutenant governor probably, I would imagine then, is not technically a part of the council, but attends most of the meetings and whatnot?
Yeah, the lieutenant governor serves as the moderator, the chair of the meetings, whenever she's in attendance.
Oh, okay, so that's another factor. So I did check out your website so that I made sure that I covered a few main points that are on it, and you have another sort of platform, for lack of a better word, on there is honest pay for honest work. So it's a little bit different from what we've been talking about. Can you address what that's about?
Yeah, absolutely. Honest pay for honest work. So there's 2 main issues that I think of when I think of this. The first is wage theft, which is a reality in Massachusetts. We have contractors who underpay or straight up don't pay workers, and in some cases they're able to get away with it. Our Attorney General has gone after them in many cases, but it's something that labor groups and community groups have really had to fight for to even get attention to that matter, and I'm very sensitive to that. I think that's why the Carpenters Union and the Electric Workers Union have endorsed me. They appreciate my perspective on that issue. And the other piece of it is equal pay for women, right? We still live in a time where women are not receiving equal wages for equal work. That's a problem. To be honest, women's rights in general, I think, sadly, are perhaps in trouble based on what's going to happen on our United States Supreme Court, one way or another, whoever fills that seat. So to have Massachusetts be a state where we're standing up for women's rights, we're standing up for equal pay against whatever may come out of Washington, I think that's going to be really critical in the next several years. So yeah, that's what I mean by equal pay. It's equal pay for everyone.
Right, and also right now the focus really is on the U.S. Supreme Court, and as you said, there's also a state Supreme Court, which impacts our daily lives, and it's important to pay attention to that as well. Of course, the press could help with giving us a little more information on it, but the transparency and maybe putting things online for citizens to be able to look at. I know there's that whole mass government website, which has a lot on it, but it sounds like it doesn't. In fact, I will admit, I looked up Governor's Council on there, and there's just a page about what it does, which is great. If you want to look that up, but it doesn't give any information about actually what they are doing day to day. Yeah, you wouldn't know how the counselors vote. You'd be pretty in the dark. No, I don't even think there was a listing of who they are. I might have missed that. Another thing that I've heard you mention is, and please, I want you to say it and not me put words in your mouth, but I believe you've made a pledge not to practice in front of judges that you have either voted on or supported. Can you talk more about that? Yeah,
I think this is really important because really we have a boiling distrust of government right now on all sides of the political spectrum. People feel like they're being left behind. People feel like they're being ignored and getting a raw deal. In our courts, more than ever, we need folks to have faith in our courts. So it's a problem, I think, when a governor's counselor, many of whom are attorneys, practice law in a courtroom before a judge who they themselves have voted to put on the bench. I mean, imagine you're in court and the judge owes his or her job to your opposing attorney. That wouldn't feel fair. I don't think it's fair. And so I've pledged never to practice law before a judge who I've voted to approve. The Boston Herald ran several articles recently on this very issue, pointing out the conflict of interest, pointing out that it's problematic. And several of the counselors, including the incumbent in this race, flippantly said it wasn't a problem and that they'd never even thought about it. And to me, that's something I'm very much thinking about, and that it's a perspective and a practice that I'll bring to the council.
That's interesting because I know just in the smaller courts, even the attorneys that are working on the same cases, they'll check into whether they have conflicts of interest with each other, whether they worked in the same office or, that kind of thing. So it surprises me that it's not a rule. It seems like kind
until
of a no-brainer.
Recently it was. And when I say recently, I mean within the last 2 decades, and I forget the exact year, but a law was passed to specifically allow counselors to practice before the judges. It was actually a carve-out. And so for whatever reason, the legislature did that. I don't know. I haven't researched the legislative history. All I know is that it doesn't feel right to me, and that as a counselor, I'm going to pledge to not engage in that.
Right. It just kind of takes some of the possible cloudiness and mess out of the equation, it sounds like. Keeps it kind of clean to not have that conflict of interest.
Right. I mean, if you want to serve in this role, I think it has to mean that you care deeply about our court system. And if you care deeply about our court system, you have to care about fairness and equity.
So where can viewers learn more about your campaign and your candidacy? I mean, we're talking here, which is great. They don't have time to watch it, whatever. How can they find out more?
You can visit my website, pauldepalo.com. You can Google my name, Paul DePalo. It'll come up right on top. And you'll see some news coverage about my campaign as well to learn more. You can find us on social media, Facebook,
that's what I was going to ask if you have it.
Paul DePalo, that's right. Where you can kind of follow what we're up to on our campaign and, commentary as it seems appropriate in the news. But I'd encourage everyone to visit my website. It's fairly comprehensive on the issues I stand for.
We kind of went over this at the beginning when we were talking about your background, and it was implied as to why you're qualified for the position, but if you were in a job interview and somebody said, how does your background qualify you for this position, or how are you qualified as a person, what would you say?
I would say, the first thing, to be honest, is temperament. And I say that because of what's going on right now in the national level. We need someone who's going to be there as a consensus builder, someone who's a moderating voice. The council, unfortunately, has a reputation for being dysfunctional right now. And, I'm going to be a big part of trying to reverse that trend. Second of all, I mentioned the diversity of my background. I think that's very valuable. I think it's important that we have counselors and judges who are able to see the big picture and are able to bring a diversity of experiences and perspectives to the council. So that's another factor that I think is important. And as I mentioned, my passion for the juvenile courts, my passion for criminal justice reform is in line with the zeitgeist that's out there right now. And it's an important perspective that I think is critical to make sure that we reverse the trend of overcrowded prisons. We need to keep our prisons reserved for the violent criminals who we don't want in our communities, right? We need to protect our communities, keep our communities safe, and part of how we do that is A, to remove violent criminals, and B, to make sure that folks who are on a bad path but who have promise to recover are getting the resources and the help they need to make sure that they're not creating a pattern of incarceration for themselves.
Right, and especially when kids are sort of stopped in their education and incarcerated, even if they're getting a little bit in the incarceration, the facility, a lot of times they just don't go any further than that.
It's such a horrible cycle because once your education, once you find yourself behind in high school, you are embarrassed. You don't want to be there. You act out because you don't know how to handle the situation. And once you're behind, you're going to end up doing more poorly on standardized tests. And in our high stakes testing environment, what the district is likely to do is to take that student who's doing poorly on MCAS and put them in remediation classes where instead of the standard curriculum, which already they're having trouble accessing, you're going to drill them on how to take a test as opposed to how to think for themselves. And that's a recipe for disaster. Kids don't want to sit through that kind of thing. So we just keep creating roadblocks and obstacles. It's almost as if we're encouraging these kids to get on the wrong path because we're making the right path so difficult and we're not providing any support along the way.
And dropouts and whatnot. So we're actually running out of time. So we could talk about this for a long time. I have really enjoyed learning more about you and more about the position, actually. I have to be honest, I didn't pay much attention before you started running. So thank you for that, and thank you for bringing that knowledge to our community. I do want to mention that the state election is taking place on Tuesday, November 6th. The polls in Shrewsbury, I can't speak for the rest of the state, are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And we also have a town vote going on for Beale School in Shrewsbury. So more importantly, there's an early voting period now, which makes life a lot easier when it comes to voting because people have a choice. And that runs from October 22nd to November 2nd. You can avoid lines, it's convenient, it's a lot easier than doing absentee ballots. That's Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And it's at the town clerk's office in whatever town you live in. So, and sometimes they have extended hours also, and you can always look online for that. So thank you so much for being here and taking the time to talk to me. It's been wonderful learning more about you.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation, and I hope everyone makes sure that they make a choice on Governor's Counselor on this November 6th.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you.